I'm very pleased to introduce our panel, Dr. Lorraine Conroy from the UIC School of Public Health and Environmental Occupational Health Sciences, Dr. Jane Lin and Dr. Kouros Mohammadian. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it.
No, that's right. That's right. You were very good.
Good, thank you, from engineering. And without further ado, I'll start because we have a very brief time period here. So let me start by showing my slides. Can you guys see that? Yes. Okay.
Not the slideshow mode. You want to put it on the slideshow mode?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about workers as infrastructure to promote sustainability. And I'm not somebody who maneuvers in this space particularly, meaning the space of sustainability, but I feel that workers are part of the infrastructure that should be considered. And so you're probably familiar with the sustainability primer from the US EPA, and it talks about the three pillars: environmental, social, and economic. And if you break those out, you actually can see workers in several places in that. If you look at environmental, for example, and you look at ecosystem services that are protecting, sustaining, and restoring the health of critical natural habitats and ecosystems, it's actually people, workers, that are doing that work and assuring that that happens. And you probably can look along the top and see that in other places as well. The social side, yellow on the side, is obvious that human health is prized in sustainability, and workers in their work, even in their sustainability work, often come up closer to hazardous conditions, hazardous substances than people out in the communities. And so I think that workers can be called out there as well. And then when you look at the economic side, jobs are already called out, and the strengthening and maintaining of current and future jobs for the purpose of sustainability is already well recognized. I won't talk about that, but I think rather than the three pillars, I think in American society, in the US, that sustainability looks a lot more like this. I think that the economic pillar, if you will, is really a fulcrum on which the social and environmental pillars balance. And so I think that workers are the ones that are providing, I think workers are the ones that are actually the forces that are providing the balance. And if we want a decent balance between the three of these areas, then we need to provide healthy work to workers. And I know Lorraine Conroy is going to talk about this after I do. Workers are also part of shaping sustainable communities. They live in the community, they are the community, and they have a big stake in maintaining the sustainability of their own communities. So that goes towards the social side. They're also integral in minimizing waste generation, limiting pollutants and greenhouse gases, and conducting the research and development that fits into this equation. And really, they mediate the supply and demand and encourage sustainable practices. If you do those things, then consideration of workers is a given. So I just want to give three quick examples of workforce and sustainability. If you look at the healthcare sector, there are about 145 million Americans that work in healthcare. I'm sorry, that work 16 million in healthcare, and 13% of payroll employment is in healthcare in the United States. And so it's a very important business sector. It also has a large environmental footprint. It uses cleaners, disinfectants, pesticides, fragrances, and other chemicals. It produces 29 pounds of solid waste per occupied bed per day. And that waste is transported to landfills where it can leach hazardous chemicals into the ground. When it gets incinerated, it emits carbon dioxide, methane, etc. Now people that are working in healthcare facilities are worrying in the US about sustainability. Patient safety is also a big consideration. And I would say that worker safety is a third area that actually integrally connects to the other two. And you can read this slide yourselves. So if you wanted to think about sustainable solutions in healthcare and how it affects the environment, the workforce, and patient occupants, you could think about green cleaning. You could think about how green cleaning reduces healthcare associated infections. It can also reduce complaints from patients and staff and reduce purchasing costs. If you installed resilient, sustainable flooring, you might find flooring that has less of a need for harsh cleaning chemicals. And when it gets replaced, it's biodegradable, so it doesn't become solid waste landfill. This also might be more comfortable to stand or walk on, prevent slips, trips, and falls, and so on. Moves by hospitals to green buildings improves patient and staff satisfaction and has been shown to have unchanged productivity and quality of care. And then you can think of it in a bigger way, since it's such a large food provider. Hospital healthcare could buy locally sourced food and so on. You could incentivize use of active transport or public transportation by employees in healthcare, and you could manage traffic around hospitals to reduce air emissions. On the front of green housing, these are the elements that I have listed that are considered in green housing. And I would add to this worker health and safety. There are more than 7.5 million construction workers in the US, 3.8 million work in residential construction. And most of these workers are actually day laborers, Latinx people, informal sector workers. They make low wages, they don't get benefits. They also have the highest rate of death and injury with lost work time in the US workforce. And so thinking about them in the realm of sustainability, I think, is important. Finally, since this is talking about COVID specifically, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a new agency in the US government, put out this memo talking about essential critical infrastructure. And it specifically calls out working in these workers in these sectors. And you see all these signs around the city, you know, the essential workers, thank you, essential workers. These are the people that are keeping society going and are actually in the COVID-19 response really taking a big hit. So I wanted to put forward that this is an excellent example of workers as infrastructure that is important for sustainability. Finally, in the Green New Deal, the Green New Deal has 4 bullet points that specifically call out workers, high-paying jobs, access to healthcare, health insurance is a right, addressing economic inequality and providing new job training and new economic development. So to end this, I would say that sustainability obviously has a strong ethics component. It considers and incorporates social justice issues. workers interact with environment and sustainability. They're impacted directly by environmental factors, by decisions that are made, and by the hazards at work. They're really the canaries in the coal mine. They work in or near the communities where they live, and they are environmental stewards actually of their employers, and they can be environmental stewards of their community. So I believe that workers should be explicitly represented, called out, and considered in all sustainability models. Thank you. Whoops, I want to stop sharing. Okay. So Dr.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. I think I'm up next. My name's Lorraine Conroy, and I'm gonna share my slides as well. I am feeling like I'm a little long, but I'm gonna try to rush through a few things at the beginning, and then hopefully at the end of the conversation, we'll have time for some discussion. But okay, so I think this is, you can see my slides, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk today about sustainability issues that were uncovered by COVID, but I'm specifically going to be talking about precarious employment and sustainability. So throughout much of the 20th century, most workers were employed in what we refer to as standard work arrangements. And nearly all of our policies and regulations are developed with the assumption of this type of work arrangement. There's a clear employer-employee relationship. Before World War II and through the 70s, we saw a corporate model with a stable workforce and long attachment to the firm, where everyone that was employed there had health and retirement benefits and other benefits. But beginning in about 1980, we saw social, political, and economic forces emerge that placed more emphasis on a company's core competency and short-term shareholder value. And this resulted in a reduction or outsourcing of cost centers such as HR and IT and occupational health and safety, but also an elimination or outsourcing of peripheral workforces like landscaping, janitorial services, and security, and finally, outsourcing of distribution operations. And this has led to what David Weil refers to as a fissured workplace, where the lead business is no longer hiring employees, but they instead buy services from other firms. And one characteristic of these types of work arrangements is that the employer-employee relationship becomes more ambiguous, and responsibilities for health and safety, job training, employee benefits, taxes, and a myriad of other things becomes less clear. And this fissuring of the workplace also has resulted in a decline in attachment to employers, an increase in long-term unemployment, and increased job insecurity. We've seen increases in non-standard and contingent work within the subsidiary firms that are more likely to hire contingent and temporary workers to increase their flexibility to respond to the needs of the lead industries. And all of these forces have combined to shift risks from employers to employees. And these risks include traditional occupational health and safety risks, but also risks associated with unemployment and underemployment. So we've always seen high levels of non-standard work arrangements in some economic sectors like construction and professional businesses and other services. But in the past 2 decades, we've seen a big increase in alternative work arrangements across the economic spectrum. And some of these industries with the highest increases in rates of alternative work arrangements are also industries with the most hazardous working conditions. So construction, manufacturing, transportation, and healthcare. These changes have severed the connection between worker productivity and wages. And for the past 2 decades, productivity has continued to increase, but median incomes are flat or decreasing, resulting in a decrease in the share of adults that live in middle-class households and decreases in the share of overall income held by the middle class. In the US, we've also seen a large shift in rates of compensation for chief executives, while workers' wages have not increased. And precarious employment is perhaps a more extreme outcome of these trends towards alternative employment arrangements, with jobs that are insecure, low-paying, dangerous, and subject to exploitation. Racial and ethnic minorities, immigrants, and women are more likely to have precarious employment and lower incomes. And as we know, there's a social gradient in health. Individuals with jobs that don't pay a living wage have higher rates of poor mental health, chronic diseases, preventable injuries, hospitalizations, and premature deaths. The COVID-19 pandemic has both stressed already precarious employment conditions for many workers, but also illustrated the central position that work plays in everybody's life. Data from May in 2020 shows that about 35% of workers began teleworking due to the pandemic. And these workers were typically in occupations that were in management, business, and financial services, professional and related occupations, and office workers. These workers had higher levels of education, were predominantly non-Hispanic whites, worked in larger metropolitan areas, maintained their full-time status, and were among the highest wage workers in the United States. They also were more likely to have a flexible work schedule. About 65% of workers could not work from home, and about 45% of these workers continued to work. So they were essential workers. That's the definition we used in Illinois. Other states use different definitions, but and what we've seen since then is that there's a high correlation between occupation and COVID deaths, particularly with the highest correlations in protective services, healthcare support, transportation, and office support. That women were overrepresented in high-risk jobs, such as healthcare, and that older workers who might be more vulnerable to the disease worked in occupations that generally had lower levels of physical proximity to other workers, but they had the same frequency of exposure to potentially infected individuals. And low-income workers are in occupations that put them at greater risk of exposure. And I'm going to highlight two groups of workers here. So in September 2020, a study came out, or an investigation came out about postal workers. And up till that date, about 9,600 postal workers had tested positive, and at least 83 postal workers have died. And meat processing, which I think got more attention in the press, this is a report from CDC in July of 2020, where they published data showing that more than 17,000 cases had occurred among meat processing workers, with 91 deaths. And these are data only for the 28 states that actually reported. It's also important to consider who is doing these jobs. So this is just some data of African Americans or Black workers in the workforce, keeping in mind that African Americans make up about 14 or 15% of the total US population. But this is a list of occupations where African Americans make up more than 20% of that particular workforce, that occupation workforce, with some as high as half, almost half of the workforce being African American. The last group that I want to talk about are non-essential workers. So about 20% of workers were unable, and this is again from May of 2020, were unable to work because their employer closed or they lost business due to the pandemic. A little less than 18% of these workers continued to receive pay from their employer. Most of these workers became unemployed. Their benefits were available. There were benefits both at the state and the federal level available to an expanded group of workers, even some that had not previously been eligible for unemployment. But you did have to prove that you had been employed. And for many workers, that was a barrier. And there were other procedural barriers in terms of understaffing of the agencies that were tasked with carrying out the distribution of benefits. Unemployment carries a whole package of health risks that are similar to and overlapping with those of precarious employment. And I think the biggest impact we've seen has been on informal workers, because they were informal workers prior to the pandemic. They were not eligible. It would be impossible to prove that they were employed. So they weren't eligible for unemployment. And that includes undocumented workers, but it also includes a large number of other workers that work in the informal economy because they have some barrier to more formal work. So you're probably wondering what all this has to do with sustainability, and I have not directly tied these employment issues to environmental sustainability, but I think I've indicated that they do contribute to an unsustainable economic trend. I'd also argue that the same forces driving these employment trends, the concentration of profits to smaller numbers of people, the externalizing costs and risks, and the lack of regulations or deregulation or ambiguous responsibilities, and an emphasis on short-term profits and shareholder value over the long-term sustainability are the same drivers that are impeding or preventing investment in and attention to environmental sustainability. And I know as scientists, we're always exploring technical approaches to solving big problems. And I think there are lots of areas that need technical expertise. I think the real solutions are going to need to be political or social changes, that technology alone isn't going to make this happen. And I just want to acknowledge that some of this work was funded by our Total Worker Health Center at UIC and funded through the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And this is our website. So I think that Jane, maybe you're up next.
Thank you, Lorraine. So we've heard two talks about sustainability of worker infrastructure. So now we're going to switch gear a little bit to talk about, let me bring up my slides. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the implications of COVID-19 on transportation sustainability, since my research is mainly focused on sustainable transportation with the focus on environmental sustainability. But the focus is on the implication of COVID-19. So let me start with the good news. So most of us probably have already seen pictures like this. So these are the satellite images from the NASA satellites showing the nitrogen oxide pollution level in Wuhan before the lockdown. This is right before the lockdown, and this is right after the lockdown, and then this is like several weeks after the lockdown. And you can see that, and this is also compared to a year before in 2019. So you can see that. So the good news is, the air quality has dramatically improved. But I want to emphasize on the word here, it's a temporary phenomenon. So we don't know whether that's going to stay. So, and my argument is probably it's not going to stay like this. So this slide shows in the state of Illinois, the service road traffic. So the blue line shows the passenger vehicle traffic, and then the orange line shows the single unit truck traffic, and this is the combination truck traffic. And the yellow line shows the all traffic, so all combination. So this is the relative change relative to the beginning of March the 4th, so right before the lockdown. So the good news here is that if you look at the overall traffic, it has gone down. And so I would argue that this is likely to stay like this because we know that a good portion of the economic sectors are going to stay working from home. So not all the workers are going to go back to the physical offices, so as Linda and Lorraine have shown. But the bad news here is I want to bring your attention to these other two curves, which are showing the truck traffic. So the bad news is the truck traffic has gone up. And in fact, it's actually gone above the level when just before the pandemic started. And I would argue it's going to continue to grow, and the reasons I will show in the next few slides. So for those of you who may not know about the transportation status of Chicago, so Chicago indeed is actually the national hub for freight transportation. So annually, so $3 trillion worth of goods actually are passing through the region, so our region here. And we have the 6th busiest cargo airport in the nation. And we also have a lot of the state highways, and we are the hub for a railroad. So it's connecting the East Coast and the West Coast, so the goods will actually have to go, a large portion of the goods will have to go through Chicago in order to go from the east to the west and from the west to the east. So Chicago is a national hub. So continue with the bad news on the goods movement. So because of the pandemic, we actually see that online shopping deliveries are going way up, and it's also likely to stay like that and continue to grow. So we actually recently conducted a survey asking people about their online grocery shopping, specifically grocery shopping, before and during, and also what they think that they are going to do after the pandemic. So this is some of the results we found. For example, this picture shows that, okay, so the blue bar shows people who, the percentage of people who actually use online grocery shopping as the primary means of shopping. And the orange bar shows the people who are using physical grocery shopping as the primary means of getting grocery items. So so obviously we all know that. So the percentage of online shopping, grocery shopping, so specifically grocery shopping, has gone up from just below 5% before the pandemic to over 36% during the pandemic. And then we also asked people, so after the pandemic, whether or not they're going to continue to use the online grocery shopping. And so over 60% of the survey participants actually indicated that they would use online grocery shopping as either the primary means or the supplemental means for getting grocery items after the pandemic. So that's a strong indication that the online shopping will continue to grow. And so the implication to that is you have to have, obviously the delivery trucks and all these things to actually deliver the online items. The other thing related to this freight transportation is the rail car volume and transit time in the Chicago region. So you can see that, so this before the pandemic, and this is in early September. So we have already gone back to almost the level before the pandemic, even though there was a little bit of dip during the pandemic. So so the freight movements basically recover back to the back to the pre-pandemic level, or even past the pre-pandemic level. So what are all these things mean to the transportation environmental sustainability? So I want to bring to your attention that, so we're talking about having more diesel heavy vehicle traffic on the surface roads versus the passenger vehicle traffic, because we're talking about a good portion of people are going to work from home. So we see the decrease in the passenger traffic, but increase in the heavy vehicle traffic. So this shows that, so in most cases, for most of the pollutants, for example, hydrocarbon and NOx and particulate matters, so you can see that in terms of grams per mile, the emission factors are much, much higher for the diesel heavy duty vehicles compared to the passenger vehicle, gasoline passenger vehicles. And on the other hand, if you look at the total VMT vehicles mile traveled, so the total light duty vehicle VMT is only about seven times higher, 7 times of the heavy duty vehicle VMT. So, and I looked at the 20-year average, and it's about 7.5. So if you compare the 20 times higher in terms of the grams per mile, and only the 7.5 times the VMT, so you can see that the diesel heavy vehicles really actually is producing a lot more emissions due to this shift. And also similar to the CO2 emissions. So generally speaking, the heavy vehicles, diesel heavy vehicles produce about 15% higher CO2 than the gasoline light duty vehicles. So moving on, so good news again. So the active modes of transportation are up. So the active modes typically include the non-motorized transportation modes like biking, walking, and using scooters and things like that. So so we all know that during the pandemic, people are increasing demand for bicycles, and a lot more people are cycling this in the past several months. So including Chicago. So these are a few large cities that showing the very high increase in the bicycling, including Chicago is this orange line. So that's good news, because that's moving people away from the motorized transportation mode. But the question is, well, how whether this trend is going to stay. And the bad news again, so we all know that the transit ridership is way down, sorry. So this actually shows the CTA rail in red, and then the bus and the metro train in green, and the PACE bus service. So in any case, in any of these transit modes, so we see that the ridership has not recovered, even as we're speaking up to October. So it's not, it's been down about 50% from the pre-pandemic level. So that's bad news. So what do all these things mean? So overall, I think it's not good news, because if you look at the total CO2 emissions from the transportation between July 2020 and February 2020, just before the pandemic, we actually seeing increase in CO2 emissions, surprising. And if I look at the numbers here, so July 2020, so the total transportation CO2 emissions it's over 145 million metric tons. And in February 2020, it was a little bit less than that. So this is even after the aviation industry has been hit hard. So the total aviation emissions took a 37% reduction. But even after that, the total transportation CO2 emissions are still up July compared to the before pandemic level. So that's overall not good news. So to summarize a little bit of the thoughts about this, what's the implication to transportation sustainability? So overall, I think the service traffic is down and will likely to remain that way, given that a good portion of the workers will continue to work from home. But the e-commerce, online shopping, is going to go up continuously, in my opinion, after the pandemic. So that really means that there is a shift in traffic composition. So you're going to see a lot more medium, large size vehicle traffic on the surface roads. And we know that trucks and commercial vehicles tend to travel longer distance, and they're consuming more energy, they're high emitters, and and also, very importantly, since we're talking about electrification of the transportation systems, so for large sized vehicles, they have a greater technological barriers in terms of electrification and other alternative fuel options. So overall, I think there are new challenges to sustainable transportation and the sustainable future in general. That ends my talk. Thank you.
Well, okay, thanks, Jane. So I'll continue with what Jane started, if I can. Okay, you can see my slides.
Ye-
Okay. Okay.
But you should swap them. We're seeing your notes page.
Oh, okay. Here we go. So is it good now? Excellent. So, well, we don't have much time left, so let me just quickly go over my slides. So hopefully we'll have some time for discussion. So Jane started, and my other colleagues actually talked about the impact of COVID and on our life and the implications for sustainability. So basically what we have seen this as a result of the COVID. We ended up actually just taking some protective measures, including travel restrictions and all sorts of social distances, closing businesses and isolations. And then you combine that with people's sense of personal fear and their just sense of social responsibility. So these are added together to getting these remarkable changes in the way that we used to know our life and lifestyle. So in order to capture these changes, we ran a survey in Chicago. We started in April, and it went all the way to early June. We collected over 1,400 actually just responses, and 915 of them are valid responses that we totally can rely on them for the analysis. And I'll show you just very few actually just slides from that survey. The survey was very long and detailed. We have published paper on that, but the overall actually just if we look at the how people perceive risk of traveling on different modes of transportation during the pandemic. So obviously shared modes and just using taxis and Uber and ride hailings are actually just are considered risky, but the biggest risk, as you can see, is transit, and this is where we were hit actually hard, the transit system in Chicago region and around the country everywhere. So in order to this is not only Chicago. If you look at actually just this diagram on the right corner, these are actually just the transit declines. Jane showed in her previous presentation, the decline in ridership in transit in Chicago. This is actually comparison in 8 different metropolitan areas across the country, and you see this is basically everywhere. It's not just in Chicago, and the sad part is when we ask people in our survey that what's going to happen after COVID, how you're going to be actually reacting, are you going to go back to use transit? Depending on actually just the purpose of transit use, people are using for work and just school, for shopping, or for just recreation, or just social activities. Almost for all activities, a large portion of people say no, they're not going to go back to use transit. And you add this to the general trend that transit ridership was in decline, especially for the bus transit. Rail was increasing slightly, mainly because of the sprawl and this is actually this diagram on the right bottom shows the transit passenger mile of commute. So that's why the rail is usually for longer commute for the commuter rails like Metro in Chicago. So we see some increase there, but just compared to bus, it's the share is very small. So the transit overall is in decline. So you add this impact of COVID. So that's the kind of a death sentence for transit system, which we consider transit to be a more sustainable mode of transportation compared to automobile. So this is something that makes everyone worried that how the transit system should recover and what can be done to bring it back to life after the COVID-19 is gone. We also looked into the same way that Jane mentioned in her presentation, that they surveyed for shopping. We did the same thing. We looked at the shopping behavior before and after pandemic. What percentage of people doing shopping, they were familiar with that. How many of them actually started shopping during the pandemic? Similarly, if we looked at the ordering food, it seems that people were more comfortable and they were using ordering food before pandemic just more than online shopping, and that gap still exists even during the pandemic. Still, people order food more than actually online shopping, for at least for groceries. But it's growing, and that in both of the cases, online shopping and ordering food, we see increase in those type of actually just behavior. And as Jane mentioned, that will be reflected into more commercial vehicles and trucks on the roadways. Back in, we looked actually just also on telecommuting and just working from home behavior. Back in 2018, we had a paper that we published. At that time, we looked at in Chicago's working population, 12% of people at that time, they told us that they have some sort of flexible working schedule. And we tried to simulate all the trips into Chicago, and then increase that work flexibility that was 12% there by adding 25% to that, or 50% means that increasing from 12% to 18%, and 25% increase was increasing it from 12% to 15%. So then we ran simulation, and we saw, increases, how that actually just affects the overall CO2 and global greenhouse gas emission, and particulate matter emissions, and all sorts of fuel consumptions. So building on this, simulation work that we had done, so we tried to actually just collect data in this survey. 15% of people reported to us saying that they had the flexibility to work all 5 days from home. And interestingly, that 15% is now increased to 48%. So almost half of our workforce were able to work from home. And interestingly, this is among those people who never experienced working from home, 37% of them never experienced working from home. Now it's just actually just 71% of people never experienced to work from home, and that's reduced only to 37%. Obviously, not every job category is eligible to work from home. So these are we pretty much actually just it seems that the job market is squeezed, and anyone who was able to work from home is working from home. We asked them to declare whether they feel that they're productive when they're working from home or not. And across both actually just categories, those who had the experience before pandemic and those who just started teleworking, working from home, just pretty much both categories feel that they are productive. 59% of new telecommuters and 62% of continuing telecommuters, they report that they are as productive or even more productive than before. So this is good news. That means that this trend can continue, and we should be able to see more teleworking happening after this. So overall, I think the lesson that we learn here is just if we ask about different conditions, that how people actually feel that they're productive and they're not, and what causes problem for them. So among those people who were not productive, mainly the problem was that they don't have the comfortable work environment, and there are some distractions actually for them at home. So we think over long run, people will try to resolve those things, by looking for better housing, better locations, and things that they can have a more comfortable and low distraction working from home. And this thing is going to be continuing. In fact, there was a article in today's Wall Street Journal. I don't know if you saw that. It was saying that, well, during the pandemic, every day Americans have saved 60 million hours of commute time. So this is the time that they saved not commuting. And almost more than 1/3 of that, basically 22 million extra hours per day, has been basically used to be more productive, and they have spent additional 22 million extra hours on primary job every day during the pandemic. So this basically tell us that from economic point of view, at least for those who were able to work from home, they have been even more productive. It's, as Jane mentioned, that we have seen actually just lots of increase in active modes of transportation and non-motorized, and bicycles, e-scooters have been actually just, many people have been using those a lot. So we're going to see more that in some cities they started expanding the existing roadways to bikeways. Just in London, they just turn actually just streets to be bikeways. So only you can travel only if you're on bike. So on the other hand, it's just, we have seen the trend of more people moving to suburb and more sprawl. So that's that will be actually just, it's going to be adding to the issues with just suburbanization. And the big problem, as I mentioned, that transit decline, and how we're going to be actually just bringing back to life after this pandemic is over. It's a big question. So we are running a bigger survey. It's NSF-funded project, rapid project, that we're running in collaboration with ASU, Arizona State University. We run a national level survey. It's a multi-wave. So we finished the first wave, almost 9,000 records collected in 25 major metropolitan areas, and we're just starting the second wave of that. So anybody interested can look at the webpage that are listed there. So with that, I can probably stop here, and we should be able to get to questions.
Are there any questions?
I was looking to see that too.
None in the Q&A.
Can people just ask questions,
Here we
Patricia?
go. Should I? Oh, no. Yeah, I don't see any written.
I'm just not sure people can we unmute their microphones, Patricia? And then people could just ask a question if they have a question. Okay, there might not be any questions.
Well, we
Oh no, somebody's logging
in. Good.
Okay.
Hi,
So
this
Great.
is Arthur Acevedo. I'm an associate dean with the law school, and I work along with Professor Hammond in helping.
Oh,
Yep, you ended up being muted again.
Well, we were hearing the first portion of that. He introduced himself, and then all of a sudden got cut.
Yeah. So you were allowed to talk. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm back. All right. Well, I just wanted, if there are no questions, I just wanted to first express my thanks to the panelists for their presentation. It was a really engaging discussion, and I enjoyed listening to the different perspectives. And I'm really excited. Our law school is new to the community at UIC, and I'm really excited at the opportunities that we will be having to collaborate on future projects. And I just really wanted to take a moment to thank the panelists and the participants for taking time to listen in and share their thoughts. But I'll leave the floor open in case there are any other questions.
Thank you, Art. We are also excited to see, in the new College of Law added to UIC, and look forward to the opportunity to collaborate
Thank you.
with you guys.
Well, hearing no further questions or comments, I think then maybe we can call it a wrap, and I wish everyone well for the weekend. And thank you for this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Bye.
Thanks.